There comes a point when silence becomes irresponsible, when the weight of what's unfolding around us demands more than passive observation. We are standing at the edge of something profoundly significant. And while many dismiss it as sensationalism or religious paranoia, the patterns are too consistent, too ancient, and too aligned with prophecy to ignore. The question isn't whether the end times are coming. The question is whether we're awake enough to recognize that they've already begun. What we're seeing across the globe isn't just political turmoil, natural disasters, or technological shifts. These aren't isolated events. They're a convergence, an unmistakable sequence that echoes the warnings laid out in the Bible thousands of years ago, and not in vague metaphorical terms, but with a precision that would be unnerving if we were paying attention. The words of ancient prophets are not just dusty scriptures anymore. They have become a mirror reflecting the state of our world. People often assume prophecy is about fear or control, but real prophecy is more about clarity. It gives you a lens, a way to interpret the chaos and assign meaning to what seems senseless. It's not there to scare you, it's there to wake you up, to shake you out of spiritual apathy and psychological numbness. Because the worst danger we face isn't just external, it's internal. It's the numbing of the soul, the normalization of evil, and the refusal to confront uncomfortable truth. The modern mind, shaped by skepticism and materialism, has lost its sensitivity to the sacred. We mock what we should fear and we embrace what we should resist. But prophecy, at its core, isn't about predicting the future. It's about piercing through the illusions of the present. And if we're paying attention, those illusions are beginning to crack. This isn't alarmism. This is realism, grounded in Scripture, history, and what you can see with your own eyes if you're willing to look past the distractions. The point of all this isn't to build panic, it's to build resolve. Because once you begin to recognize the signs, you realize the time for passive belief is over. What's required now is courage, clarity, and an unwavering commitment to truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. So the conversation isn't about when the end will come, it's about whether we're ready for what's already unfolding. And once you see that, there's no going back to sleep. One of the most telling signs that we are moving deeper into prophetic fulfillment is the global surge in deception. Not just political deception or media spin or manipulative advertising, though those are certainly part of it, but something deeper, a kind of moral confusion that blurs the line between good and evil until they become nearly indistinguishable. In the biblical narrative, deception is not simply a matter of ignorance. It's often a willful turning away from truth in favor of comfort, convenience, or power. And when you look around today, it's hard not to see that dynamic at play almost everywhere. Let's take a psychological angle here. Human beings are meaning-seeking creatures. When meaning collapses, people become vulnerable, desperate even, for a framework that can restore order. This is where deception enters most potently. It doesn't always appear malicious. Often it disguises itself as compassion, progress, or safety. But what it really does is undermine foundational truths and replace them with narratives that feel good but are fundamentally hollow. See this in the normalization of moral relativism, the idea that truth is subjective, that your truth and my truth can coexist, even if they contradict, is a philosophical dead end. It sounds inclusive, but it erodes our ability to discern. Once discernment is gone, deception flourishes. And it's not just individuals who are deceived, it's entire cultures. Societies that lose their grasp on objective truth inevitably descend into confusion and conflict. The prophets of old warned of this. Isaiah said, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil." That wasn't a poetic exaggeration. It was a psychological diagnosis of a culture in decay. Now, in the context of end-time prophecy, this global deception isn't just an unfortunate byproduct of modernity, it's a strategic component. The Scriptures speak of a great falling away, a time when even those who once stood firm in truth will be swept away by the prevailing winds of falsehood. And that's not just religious language, it's a deeply human warning. When people lose their grip on what's real, they become malleable, easy to manipulate, easy to herd, and ultimately easy to control. It's not enough to identify deception. We need to understand why it works. It plays on fear, on desire, on ego. It promises peace without sacrifice, unity without accountability, and freedom without truth. And it's incredibly seductive because it gives people what they want without demanding who they must become. That's the real danger. Not just that we're being lied to, but that we're growing comfortable with it. If we don't anchor ourselves in something immovable, something real, we will drift. And in times like these, drifting isn't harmless. It's deadly. The ancient words weren't written to entertain us. They were written to equip us. So if deception is the first sign to manifest, it's because truth is the first thing we're meant to defend. You want to navigate the days ahead with strength? Then start by refusing to be lied to, even if the truth costs you something, especially if it does. Another unmistakable signal that biblical end-time prophecy is unfolding before our eyes is the rapid acceleration of global conflict and unrest. I'm not just referring to war in the traditional sense, though that certainly plays a role, but to a broader, more destabilizing trend. What we're witnessing is the disintegration of order on multiple fronts, political, social, spiritual, and it's happening at a speed that is both alarming and disorienting. Let's consider the psychological implications. When institutions fail, when governments are corrupted, when norms break down, people lose trust, not just in others, but in reality itself. That's dangerous. Because when trust erodes, fear fills the vacuum, and fear, especially unprocessed collective fear, doesn't just destabilize individuals, it destabilizes nations. You get polarization, division, scapegoating, and ultimately violence. And that's not a bug in the system. It's a feature of what Scripture warned would unfold in the final days. Nation rising against nation, not just in terms of geopolitics, but in the sense of identities, ideologies, and worldviews clashing without a shared framework for peace. This fragmentation isn't random, it's systemic. The conflicts we're seeing, whether in the streets, on the news, or in digital space, are being fueled by deep, unresolved human problems: pride, envy, tribalism, and despair. These aren't just emotional conditions, they're spiritual ones. And they make us vulnerable not just to external enemies, but to internal collapse. Because no empire, no nation, no community can endure without a unifying moral compass. And when that compass is lost, chaos follows. If you think this is merely a political cycle, you're not paying attention. What we are experiencing is a moral and existential crisis masquerading as political disagreement. And that confusion is deliberate. When you sever a people from their spiritual foundations, you can manipulate their fears, shape their desires, and direct their rage. You create conflict not to solve problems, but to maintain control. This is why wars don't seem to end. This is why peace always feels just out of reach, because the root issue isn't geographic, it's spiritual, it's internal. Scripture repeatedly associates the end times with an increase in wars and rumors of wars. That phrase has a psychological weight to it. It's not just about bombs dropping. It's about the constant anticipation of collapse. It's about living in a state of perpetual anxiety, waiting for the next upheaval, the next disaster, the next betrayal. That level of sustained stress doesn't just wear people down. It reshapes their very perception of the world. And once reality is distorted, truth becomes negotiable. That's the danger. This is why discernment is more critical now than ever, because the true battlefield isn't out there, it's in here, in the mind, in the heart. If you want to survive what's coming emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, you need to know what's real, who you are and who you belong to. Otherwise, you will be swept up in the storm like so many already are. Don't just watch the conflict, understand it, because if you can't see the deeper war being waged, then you're already a casualty of it. One of the most unsettling aspects of our current moment is the distortion of truth on a mass scale And I don't mean lies in the simple sense. We've always had those. What we're seeing now is more insidious. It's the replacement of objective truth with personalized narratives where how you feel is treated as more valid than what actually is. And that's not just a cultural shift, that's a spiritual danger, because truth is not optional, it's foundational. And when truth becomes negotiable, so does meaning. And when meaning collapses, chaos takes its place. This isn't just a matter of bad journalism or political spin, it's deeper than that. It's an erosion of the collective capacity to agree on what reality is. And when that happens, you can't have trust. You can't have community. You can't even reason with one another. You just shout across ideological trenches, clinging to your own version of the story, demonizing those who don't share it. That's not intellectual disagreement. That's tribal warfare, and it's deadly, not just for society, but for the soul. Now, if you go back to biblical prophecy, there's a consistent warning that in the last days, deception will be rampant. People will heap up for themselves teachers who say what their itching ears want to hear. That's not just a poetic warning, it's a psychological diagnosis. It's describing the craving for affirmation over truth, a desire to be soothed rather than challenged, to live in a comfortable illusion rather than wrestle with the discomfort of reality. And let me be clear, that is not compassion, that is corruption of the highest order. What we're dealing with is a kind of collective self-hypnosis, where truth is sacrificed for convenience. And many people, even good people, go along with it, not because they're evil, but because they're tired. They're overwhelmed. And when life becomes too complex, we retreat into simplicity. But there's a cost. Because when you abandon truth, you abandon the very structure that protects you from being manipulated. You make yourself vulnerable to every ideology, every trend, every smooth-talking voice that promises peace while leading you to ruin. This is why discernment is no longer just a virtue, it's a survival skill. And discernment isn't cynicism. It's not about distrusting everything. It's about learning how to recognize what is grounded and what is hollow. It's about calibrating your internal compass to something eternal, something unshakable, so that when everything around you starts to blur, you still know where you stand. You have to choose. Will you anchor yourself to truth, even when it's hard, even when it costs you? Or will you drift along with the cultural current, comforting yourself with illusions until you no longer remember what real even feels like? Because make no mistake, the war on truth is not just a battle over facts. It's a battle over your mind, your freedom, and ultimately, your soul. There's something disturbingly familiar about the normalization of moral decay, almost as if it crept up on us while we were too distracted to notice. That's how corruption often works, not in the form of dramatic collapse, but through subtle compromise. A little dishonesty here, a bit of silence there, and before long the lines between good and evil become blurred. What was once unthinkable becomes tolerable, and then, strangely enough, it becomes expected. We rationalize, adapt, and even start to participate, telling ourselves it's just how the world works now. But it hasn't always been this way. There was a time when the moral structure of a society, whether based on religious values, philosophical principles, or shared cultural norms, acted as a kind of guardrail. It didn't prevent all wrong, but it certainly slowed the descent. It reminded people that their actions mattered, that virtue wasn't just a private matter, but a collective one. But today, in this so-called enlightened age, that structure is under siege, and many don't even realize it's happening. Prophecy speaks of this too, that in the final days, people will call evil good and good evil. That isn't just poetic language, it's a psychological phenomenon. It describes the moral inversion we're now seeing across media, education, law, and entertainment. When selfishness is rebranded as empowerment, when promiscuity is redefined as liberation, when apathy is masked as tolerance, we're not progressing. We're decaying, but pretending it's evolution. And the cost isn't just social, it's deeply personal. Because the soul can't flourish in a world where virtue is mocked and vice is rewarded. People become fragmented, anxious, hollow. They chase pleasure but can't find peace. They achieve success but feel meaningless. They appear free but live enslaved to their appetites. That's what happens when a society trades moral clarity for moral confusion. We don't just lose our ethics, we lose our identity. But here's the twist. Most people don't want to live this way. Deep down, there's still a hunger for truth, for goodness, for meaning. You see it in the quiet despair, in the midlife crises, in the restless scrolling through screens that never satisfy. You see it in the burnout, in the loneliness, in the longing for something real. People know, even if they can't articulate it, that something essential has been lost. And so the question becomes, are you willing to swim against the current? Are you willing to take a stand in a world that rewards silence and punishes conviction? Because to live morally in an immoral age is not easy. It is a rebellion. It requires strength, clarity, and an unshakable commitment to truth. But the alternative is far worse: to conform, to decay quietly, to betray your conscience in the name of fitting in. So ask yourself, what are you really preserving when you stay silent? And what might be redeemed if you dare to speak, to act, to live with integrity in a world that has forgotten what that even means? So where does all of this leave us? We've looked at the signs, the shifts, the unsettling alignment between prophecy and our present moment, not in a way that should leave us panicked or paranoid, but with a sobering awareness. The world is not as stable as it pretends to be. What's happening around us, the rise of moral confusion, the breakdown of truth, the glorification of self over sacrifice, is not random. It fits a pattern, one long foretold. And if that's true, then the question is no longer, is this real, but what am I going to do about it? Because once you see clearly, you can't unsee. Once you recognize that much of what we call progress is really decay dressed in new language, you're faced with a choice. You can go back to sleep, reassure yourself that it's all fine, that things have always been this way, or you can wake up. You can take personal responsibility for how you live, what you value, and who you become. You don't need to be perfect to stand for something true. You just need to stop cooperating with what's false. And that begins in small daily acts, how you treat people, what you consume, what you prioritize, what you refuse to laugh at even when everyone else is. It's not about fear, it's about courage. It's about remembering that even in a dark time, the light still shines through those who refuse to be swallowed by the chaos. The end times, if they are indeed unfolding, are not just a script to be watched passively. They are a call to live fully, fiercely, and faithfully. So don't be discouraged. Be awake. Be grounded. And most of all, be ready. Because silence may be comfortable, but truth, even when costly, is redemptive. And in the end, it's truth, not comfort, that will set you free.